WKRG Plus, we make weather easy to understand. This is WeatherWise.
Hello everyone, I'm Chief Meteorologist Ed Bloodsworth with WKRG News 5, and welcome to another edition of WeatherWise as we work to make the Gulf Coast and the entire U.S. weather wiser. Today we are talking about a subject that most folks who've lived on the Gulf Coast for many, many years know about, but the topic that a lot of folks who visit the Gulf Coast do not know about. And of course, we are talking about rip currents, something that tends to be make stories in all the wrong ways as we move through the spring and summer months. So we're going to focus in a little bit on the dangers posed by these currents. Of course, when you're visiting the beaches for your vacation, for spring break, whatever that may be, the Gulf of Mexico and now Gulf of America tends to be a very, very busy spot. A lot of folks like to come and check out the Emerald Coast in Northwest Florida, and of course those white sand beaches of Baldwin County and Mobile County in Alabama. But as you venture into the water, there are hidden dangers in the form of very strong currents, and specifically one current, a rip current, that unfortunately has had the propensity to take many lives for folks, especially visiting on our stretch of the Gulf Coast. So let's go ahead and focus in on these currents. From the National Weather Service in Mobile, rip currents, get this, are the number one weather-related killer on the Gulf Coast, and that includes the Alabama and Florida Panhandle Gulf Coasts. They account for more fatalities than tornadoes, hurricanes, flash flooding, and lightning strikes combined. I want to go ahead and put that into perspective and show you this graph. We're going to focus in on the time frame from 2002 to 2024, and this represents the number of fatalities from each weather hazard that you see listed here. So for flooding, 19 deaths during that time frame. You can see those bars go a little bit higher once you get down towards the tornadoes at 81. But far and away, it's rip currents that are that result in the most fatalities at 224. Again, that goes all the way up to 2024. And unfortunately, in the year 2025, we have had a few instances of folks losing their lives in Northwest Florida and Lower Alabama from strong rip currents. So let's dive into the science of rip currents. What are they and how are they formed? Well, it's a common occurrence. And just about every day, even if the weather is nice, you can have a risk for strong currents. And so what happens is you get a channel of water that begins to develop here. You have waves crashing onto the coast, and then you get an outward channel that develops. And right in between those two areas of incoming waves, you tend to get a little quiet spot that develops, and that is where your rip current is located. Now, the current itself can be very, very strong, and it moves away from the coast. So if a person were to get caught in that current, they would feel themselves getting pulled out into open water. And that's a very scary thought. Now, of course, you're getting pulled away from the coast, so your natural instinct is to get back to the coast as quickly as you can. And most folks instinctually start to swim back towards the coast while they're in the rip current. And that is the very last thing you should ever try to do in a situation if you find yourself in a current. First thing, you need to stay calm. You need to not panic if you ever find yourself caught in a rip current, and never swim against the current. At that point, you're just tiring yourself out, and you never want to find yourself tired and exhausted just treading open water. That's a sign for very bad things to happen. Now, what you should do, instead of swimming back towards the coast, you should swim along the coast or parallel to the coast. If you swim parallel to the coast, you're able to get yourself out of the rip current. That's one route of escape. The second route is to let the current actually take you out. Now you think, why would I want to go farther out into the open water? Well, the farther out that rip current goes, that rip current is eventually just going to disperse and fade away, as evidenced by here. So you look at the escape routes. We just showed you that model showing you what the rip current is. Now let's focus in on how to escape. If you swim parallel to the coast, then yes, you're able to get out of the current. or you can let the current take you out a little bit more, because eventually that current is going to dissipate, it's going to disperse, and then it would be much easier to get back to the coast. In fact, you may actually end up following sort of the natural flow of things, and you'll end up starting to get worked back into some of those waves where they will actually take you back into the coast. Once you're able to get out of the rip current, you can swim diagonally back to the coast, and at that point, you won't have any currents that are fighting against you. It's also important to know our beach flag system when you visit our stretch of the coast. So, in Mobile County, Alabama, and Northwest Florida, they run on a 4-flag system: green, yellow, single red, and double red. It's a little different in Baldwin County. If you're heading down to Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, Fort Morgan, they run on a 3-flag system of yellow flags, single red flags, and double red flags. Let's take a look at these flags in greater detail. On a day with green flags flying, that represents a low hazard or a low overall threat of rip currents. Now, I want you to keep in mind, if you're going to the coast and you see green flags, low does not mean zero. A lot of folks want to equate this to a traffic system where green means go. You should go. You can go, but you should always use caution whenever you're getting into the Gulf. Even with calm seas, you can still get rip currents to develop. The rip current threat starts to rise and becomes a bit more elevated when we achieve yellow flag conditions. And this represents a medium hazard in the waters and also represents a moderate surf and moderate rip current condition. Now, at this point, you can still enter the Gulf or enter the waters, but you must use extreme caution. At that point, the waves are kicking up a little bit, and things are getting a little bit choppy, and generally the more wave action you have, the more water coming into the coastline, the more likely you are to have rip currents. And especially with a strong onshore flow, with water piling up, more waves, more currents, you get the picture. So yellow flags, you also always have to be very careful when those are flying. And then we get to our red flag conditions. Single red flags, at that point, the waters are not closed, but it is recommended that you do not go in. At that point, the wave activity and the rip current threat is at a much more heightened state of threat. So at that point, it's best to just hold off until conditions start to improve. And then you enter the double red flag conditions. Once you see 2 red flags side by side, one on top of each other, at that point, you cannot get into the waters. At that point, it is illegal to get into the waters. And those are usually saved for significant days when we have systems in the Gulf, maybe tropical systems. Even if they're farther out into the waters, they can still kick up the surf in a way that could lead to significant threats of currents and high surf. And usually we're also dealing with some intense wave activity and continuing to deal with some beach erosion issues as well. So generally, double red flags, can't get in. You're not allowed to get in. You may have to be subject to a fine if you are found getting into the waters on a double red flag day. Now, there's another flag that you may see out there, but this one has nothing to do with rip currents. This one is a purple flag, and the purple flag signals another danger out there. This signals the threat of dangerous marine life, and that marine life can be multitudes of things. In some parts of the country, that can mean sharks, that can mean stingrays, but for the Gulf, that usually means you're dealing with swarms of jellyfish. They can be quite intrusive as folks are visiting and the waters warm up. In fact, you can get massive swarms of this specific type that you see. That's what we call stinging nettles. We also tend to get, on occasion, man-o'-war, Portuguese man-o'-war, also called blue bottles. Those are the sort of ones that have the gas-filled chambers that they kind of float around. They have this little sail feature, and they just float around with the currents and the winds. And so, occasionally we get those to wash up on shore, and all those very long tentacles can still be harmful. Now, thankfully, the stinging nettles, the ones that we most commonly see, they typically aren't the kind that are going to pose a threat to your life, but they can be quite a nuisance. And anyone who's been stung by one of those, it is not a pleasant experience. So, when you go to the beaches, usually when you're coming off of one of the docks, getting onto the beach, you will see the flags. You'll see one flag that denotes the rip current threat, and you will see a second flag sometimes with the purple signifying the threat of dangerous marine life present. So, rip currents are a major hazard. Dangerous marine life, also a big hazard for folks who are coming into our stretch of the Gulf Coast, for folks who are visiting. So, bottom line, you always want to make sure you're staying on top of weather conditions, changing weather conditions, and usually those rip currents, they're all going to be dictated by what happens in terms of our winds. They're going to be dictated by a lot of other things that can really help to turn up the Gulf and increase the threat of rip currents. So make sure you are staying safe as you're visiting our amazing beaches on the Alabama and Northwest Florida Gulf Coast, or really even the Atlantic coast. You'll see a similar beach flag system. And that's going to do it for this edition of WeatherWise. I want to thank you all for joining us today. You will find additional segments. We've also covered up previous episodes here. And the whole point of our WeatherWise segment is to make sure that we are educating you, making sure you know about what's happening out there, and kind of take you into the weeds a little bit, get you into our weather and into the science part of the weather and what we do every single day. Also, you'll want to be on the lookout for new episodes of Weather World, where we look at some of the biggest topics affecting the world of weather. And I do mean world. We're going to focus on local, focus on national, and also focus on international weather. We always see some amazing video from around the world, and it's always something interesting for us to talk about. So that'll do it from the News 5 First Alert Storm Team on this edition of WeatherWise, as we cover rip currents on the Gulf Coast. From all of us at WKRG News 5, enjoy the rest of your day, stay safe, have fun, and stay weather-wise.